Now, the main thing, our main goal here is that we have to make this kind of tinted ceiling object, which is necessary to make sure that we have the shape that we're looking for. But we got to make sure that the tinted ceiling panel actually fits into the right space. So what we're going to do is we're kind of make the frame for it to set into, and then we should basically be able to work off of that. So I'm going to make the arch first. So we're going to have to make sure we double check that the arch fits into the correct space. Now, one thing that you really need to keep an eye on when you're working on module assets is you need to make sure that you're aware of how those pieces fit together. So, for example, when you make an arch piece that is going on top of one of these columns, you actually cannot make it sit directly on the top of the column, because this column has one half of it essentially on the outside edge, so facing out into the room, and then one half on the inside edge. And the inside edge is actually going to be covered by the ceiling panel that you're placing into it. So if you aren't careful, you might actually make an asset that sort of prevents another asset from going into it. So I'm going to start with the arch, and then we'll go and get the other piece set up there. So first of all, I know that this arch is going to need to be one half of the size of this column, and I know that it needs to fully encompass the size of the distance between the two columns, and I know from the picture that I'm looking at that it's roughly square from the distance between the two columns to the distance between the top of the column and the top of the arch. So because I'm keenly observant of that type of thing, it should actually be very easy to make this asset. So essentially what I need to do is I'm going to make a piece that is 0.75, which is the radius of the column, by 8 by 8. So I can actually just type in a keyboard entry for this. So in the box, you can actually do this with Maya as well. This option would be available in the channel box if you wanted to type it in. But like, okay, so I'm going to do my length is going to be 8. My width is going to be 0.75. And my height is going to be 8. And then I create it. And boom, that was the easiest thing that ever happened. So this one is a good way to explain how pivot points can help us, because this piece is going to be much easier to place with proper pivots. So because I want to work on this piece for a second, though, I'm actually going to isolate it as well. So in Maya, again, you just want to hide everything that you're not working with just to make it easier. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Effect Pivot. I'm going to affect the pivot only. And with my vertex snapping, I'm going to snap the vertex all the way into the corner and the back of this piece. So remember what I said in the previous lesson about you want to snap to the point of contact, to the most accurate point of contact that you can. And this is essentially it's snapping into the arch that would be next to it, and it's snapping into the column. So it's at the, and it's also going to snap against the ceiling piece that it indirectly relates to as well. So so that's going to be the right pivot. I'm going to zero out the position here. So in Max, you can just right-click on the arrows and it'll switch to 0. Then I'm going to go in to this asset. I'm going to convert it to an editable poly. And I'm going to do 3 connects going along this axis. And then I'm going to use pinch to nudge two of those connects relatively far to one side. Then I'm going to grab the verts in the middle section, turn off snapping for a second, and I'm going to pull them up. And this I'm kind of doing it to eye because again, it's an internal piece. It won't matter as much. And again, I'm not going to make all of the details of this piece because this is a block-in. We'll go in and we'll make the more final pieces shortly after that. So then I'm going to go in, but I'm going to make it more curved. So I always try to do that first, where when I'm making a curved shape, I try to get the core features of the shape first, and then I add in subdivisions for more curvature. So I think that the number of subdivisions I actually need to get the curvature that I'm looking for is just 2. But when I try to make even subdivisions for curve purposes, I just always use a pinch and a slide of 0. And I'm going to roughly do this to eye. So I'm going to grab these verts, slide them up. Grab these verts, slide them up a little bit more. And so this may not be exactly perfect. I may want to actually move these out a little bit. So if I switch to the scale tool, I can kind of slide it out. And then I'm just going to grab each of these lines of verts, slide that out a little bit too. And so with the bare minimum of pieces, that's roughly what I get. Now I could make this more detailed. I don't think it's necessary for this purpose right now, but at the very least, I'm going to start placing it, and then if I want to add more details, I can do that now. So I'm going to end to isolate. And I'm going to move to grid snap, so I'm going to turn on the grid snap. I'm going to snap it so that it's lined up with the column, and then I've got it up in here. So I just noticed something really interesting by looking at this, which is that it's actually way too tall. Now, that's not exactly what I expected, but it's not completely surprising either. And this is a good idea of perspective, sort of getting the better of you. You got to be careful with this when you're working on pieces like this, because you'll often make decisions about scale that may not be 100% accurate. So I made this mistake here by thinking that it was as tall as it is long. But if I look at it in perspective, that's clearly not true, right? It definitely should be half as tall as it currently is. So what I want to do in this case, because it's probably a good idea to just be uniform here, I could just scale it down to 50% and make sure I'm using the non-uniform scale. So I can type in 50%. In Maya, you would type in 0.5, and then I can take a look at that, and that looks much better. And then also it looks like it's snapping in the correct place, but I do think it's actually slightly too wide. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to grab these front faces. Actually, I don't want the snap there right now, so I'm going to turn off the snap, and I'm going to slide it back a little bit. And then I also don't want it to extend off of the edge of the pillar, so I'm going to grab the verts that are right at the edge, and I'm going to scale those out so that they're just inside the section of the pillar. And that should work okay. Now, there's one piece of this that we could make more edits to. And I think I'm actually going to err on the side of making this correction. So let's see. Because a lot of times you'll miss out on certain details, and right now we know by looking at this asset that it has a trim on the top and it has a trim on the sides. So I'm going to quickly try to kind of fabricate that by selecting my edge piece here. I'm going to make a connect in the middle. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I just want to drag it straight down. So I'm going to connect that there. And then I'm going to grab these faces in the front, and I'm going to extrude them out a tiny bit. And then actually, because I know that this is actually going to be eventually a curved shape, I'm going to grab both of the edges on that piece and kind of scale them in. And then the other part that I wanted to do is I wanted to make a little bit of a trim at the top. But remember, we made a trim. We're making a trim on a piece that already has the exact dimensions that it should. So if we're adding a trim here, we cannot add a trim onto this piece on the top. It has to be within the shape here. And in some cases, that means that we may have to adjust the height of the arch to allow for it. So in this case, I might actually give it a little bit of extra space. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just make a cut here. And actually, I'm going to use Swift Loop, or essentially Insert Edge Loop, to do that. Now, Swift Loop made this kind of curved edge. Now, that's equivalent to relative distance from edge for Insert Edge Loop. But I'm going to flatten it out. You could also use equal distance from edge, and that will make sure that it's always the same shape, basically. But you can always flatten things out like that by just scaling them until they flatten out. And then I'm going to nudge that up a little bit. And I'm actually, just because I know that I don't want to overdo this by combining the two lips, I'm actually going to delete this face out and this face out. So I just selected those and selected delete. Then I'm going to select, oops. This mouse is overly sensitive. I'm not super used to it. So then I'm going to extrude that out. I'm going to turn on the snaps, which will have vertex snap. Oops. I'm going to snap it exactly in line with the with this lip here. Then I'm going to switch to delete these other inside faces. And then I'm going to target weld these. And now Maya has a target weld. Now it has the exact target weld that Max has, thanks to the modeling toolkit. But you can also use the merge vertex tool, and it functions basically identically to this. So now this is a little more detail that I'm doing with the other pieces because it's not really necessary to do. But I want to make the point, because I think it's somewhat important, that this is necessary to do to make sure that you're getting the correct shape for these assets. So like, you might sit there and go like, oh, you know, I need to add that trim. Let me just extrude it from the top. Or, oh, I need to add that one like pillar piece there. Maybe I should add a totally different pillar. And the reality is that when you break down these pieces, they all look really uniform. So by combining as much as possible into a single asset, we get more mileage out of it than we would have otherwise. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this asset work for you. But, oh shoot, I was doing bad naming conventions. I need to call this arch. And this box here needs to be called square column. And I'm actually just going to hit Control-C. I'm just going to quickly go through. I'm going to rename all of these square column. There's a batch rename tool, but I wouldn't worry about it. I just want to make sure that we're organized, because if we don't stay organized while we're working on this, it's going to be really, really hard to go in and actually make all of these modules into completed assets. So, Nick, you just asked if I'm expecting the same level of detail in the Thunderdome speed block or fast block, and the answer is no. So I'm not expecting this kind of detail in anything that's a Thunderdome in the class. Because the Thunderdomes are expected to be done in an hour. You want to experiment with it. You probably want to make something that's a small scale. And you just want to test yourself. You want to probably use some of these kinds of techniques, but you're probably not going to benefit too much by getting mired in details in a Thunderdome. This is more what I'm expecting you to do for your actual projects to get set up for your final project by the end of the class. Like, what I'm hoping is that you'll be able to use this same kind of technique for building your assets for your final project that will allow you to essentially create a game industry standard level of work, but then also to just generally know how to do this, because you will literally need to do this in any job that you work at as an environment artist in the industry. So I really just want you to know this, and I want you to do it for your projects. You don't have to do it for every single like speed test that you're doing for the class. No. So hopefully that answers that question. So okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and forgot that F wasn't the focus key. All right, so now I'm going to show you why pivots are super cool. Because we have this pivot over here. I need to add 2 of these pieces here. So right now I'm going to turn off the vertex snapping. I'm actually going to turn on angular snapping. Now you can turn on angular snapping by holding down the E key on the keyboard in Maya and then selecting discrete rotate. But in Max it's just angular snapping. So I turn on the angular snapping. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag out a copy here, and notice because we're using a decently good sized grid, it's pretty easy to do. I'm going to drag out 2 copies. And then I'm going to drag out 1 other copy. And I'm going to drag this out to the point that I need it. Hit OK. And then I'm going to just rotate it using the angle snapping. Now, you may think, wow, Tristan's a genius. How did he know that? I'm sure you are. But so this is the reason that snapping pivot points is extremely important. Because like the amount of work necessary to hinge this piece is astronomically less than you would need to make the same piece fit if you were doing a less optimal pivot point. So like, for example, if the pivot wasn't at the back, you wouldn't be able to pivot it on this hinge. And what we'll do here is essentially, now it's exactly in kind of a, each one is using up a quarter of the space. So the remaining quarter on the inside will be used by the ceiling section, and the remaining quarter on the outside will be used for a separate molding panel that we're going to stick into that slot for these assets. So you'll notice it in the screenshot that we're using as reference. There's actually this separate molding piece that we just can set in there that will accomplish that goal. So yeah. Now let's go ahead and take the same arch and stick it into the other side. So I'm going to grab this arch piece, and I'm going to drag it across the other way. Now, you'll notice that it's the opposite direction, right? Well, that's actually no problem at all, because all you have to do, and this is the way that you would do it in any game engine, is you just negatively scale it on X. So I can just type in -100, and then that takes it to the opposite side. Now I can go ahead and drag this out, and actually I'm going to make 3 copies. And then I'm going to go through, rotate this one 90 degrees, and then, yeah, I'm done with that bit. So now the only other thing I want to do is, because I know that I've got the other pieces coming in for the back units, I really need to get those pieces across there as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab this, move it out. I'm going to move that over to the other side. And then I'm just going to actually negative scale this one as well. And this time I can negative scale it not on X but on Y, or in the case of Maya it would be on Z. Wait. Okay, actually. Yeah, okay, I see what's going on here. So that way, once I've negatively scaled it, then I'll rotate it 180 degrees, and that'll work fine. Now, I don't have to negatively scale them every single time, so I could just drag it out and position it in the correct spot over there, and that's fine. I mean, it really just depends on how you want to set up your workflow. Just know that there's generally nothing wrong with negatively scaling an asset. The only thing that you want to make sure that you do is understand that you did that, and that you're going to need to do a little bit of conversion to get the assets working correctly when you convert it into a game engine, because you're not going to be able to bring in that exact setup. So then I'm going to drag this across here. Now, one thing that's particular to 3ds Max, and I think this is a little bit suboptimal, but I don't really have any choice in the matter, is in order to snap to a grid point, you actually have to drag to a grid point. And if it's blocked in some way by a 3D asset, you actually have to make sure that you're dragging to an exact grid space. So you'll notice that I'm kind of dragging out, but because I have my axis alignment, I'm just dragging it out on the y-axis. It's staying pinned to the y-axis, and then I'm just lining up my my cursor with the line of grid points that I want you to use. So okay, so that's pretty cool. Now I think that we've got a really easy option here, which is we can make the wall pieces directly above this column, or directly above this arch. And because I want to try to make this as complete as possible, as fast as possible,